Hello.
Hello.
Hello. My name is David Miller. I am Canadian. It's not the point of this panel, but it does make me happy nonetheless. We're very excited to welcome you to this session, which is titled, "Our House is on Fire. Is our economy driving inequality and environmental disaster?" Yes, of course it bloody well is. However, we've got a fantastic panel, and from my perspective, this issue of the economy and the environment is the key issue of our time. And you can question, is it our economic system? Is it the fact we've structured capitalism the way we have that is driving these results? And others are going to get into that. But our response to this is going to define the success of our fight against global heating. C40 research demonstrates that when we include the impact of urban consumption and what that has in driving emissions outside cities, C40 emissions rise from 6% of the global total to 10%. So consumption almost doubles the amount of emissions. Our research also demonstrates the direct link between GDP and climate impact. And of course, at the same time, inequality is a fundamental challenge within cities and globally, and in many cases, it's getting worse. Pope Francis has told us we are faced not with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather with one complex crisis, which is both social and environmental. Strategies for a solution demand an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and at the same time, protecting nature. The importance of economics in both of these issues is undeniable. So today we ask, what is the role of a new economics in creating the world we want? This is a new and exciting area for C40, one in which we're finding our feet. And so for us today is the start of a conversation on the role of cities on this issue. To help us explore this, we've got a wonderful range of speakers, including Mayor Ted Wheeler from Portland. Mayor, thank you so much for joining us today and for your work on this issue. And including experts breaking new ground on how climate and economy interact. But to help us get in the right frame of mind, we have a quick video introduction. Can you please roll the video?
Climate change is not just an environmental issue. It is inextricably linked to challenges of tackling inequality. The climate crisis is unfair, impacting some communities disproportionately. Some communities are more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change than others. Climate change exacerbates existing social, economic, and spatial inequalities. Our response to this climate crisis can also be unjust.
Cities are the best place to deliver bold climate action that is fair, equitable, and beneficial for all. They can lead the way in delivering renewable energy, access to low-carbon transport, and increased green spaces, which will bring about quality and sustained job creation, and healthier and more resilient communities. However, the ability of cities to implement effective action lies in their critical mass of people. They must seek to engage with all communities, particularly those hard-to-reach groups, to deliver equitable benefits.
To be our guide in this session, I'd like to introduce our host, partner of C40, Kate Power. Kate is an expert in sustainable consumption and behavior change with 15 years experience in the nonprofit sector as a campaigner, researcher, and knowledge broker. She's previously held positions at the Copenhagen Resource Institute, the Copenhagen Business School, and Greenpeace International. She's now head of sustainable consumption programs of KR Foundation, a key partner of C40, and in that role has helped make C40's new program, the Thriving Cities Initiative, a reality. With that, I'm delighted to hand over this panel to Kate and look forward to a fascinating session. Thank you very much for being here today. Kate.
Hi, thanks everyone for coming. We've heard a lot about what we need to do about our economic system, and this is the session where we're going to actually find out how we're going to do it and start talking about action. So I'm really excited to invite up here our first panel. Are they all going to come up at the same time? Okay, so we have Kate Raworth, Alison Tickell, Jaime Margolin. Can you come up? Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to start with Kate Raworth, who we know as an economist and academic, and has also worked for Oxfam as an expert on human development. So a great expert to introduce this panel. So Kate, how have the world's economic systems led us to the climate challenges that we now face?
Well, that's a very small question.
Yeah.
Thank you. How have the world's economic systems led us to the challenges we now face? Okay. The tragedy is that 20th century economics has led us there, and it is still being taught in far too many universities of the world. So who in this room ever studied any economics? Put up your hand. Okay. What's the first diagram you remember learning? Right. It's the same the world over. As if to say, welcome to economics. Remember, let's go back to ancient Greek. Economics means the art of household management. I think everybody in this room is actually an economist. We are all here to manage our planetary household in the interests of all of its inhabitants. But economics courses say, welcome to economics, here's supply and demand, as if the market should be front and center of our concern. And that puts price at the front and center of our concern, and anything that falls outside of price we call an externality. So if you want to talk about climate change, ecological collapse, coral reef bleaching, hole in the ozone layer, an economist will say, yes, yes, you're talking about environmental externalities. And when we hear that language, it's obvious that's completely the wrong way to talk about it. We need to start with the living systems of our planetary home, establish them there first. That's why the Doughnut has our living planetary home and our life support systems on the outside, and then think about the needs of every inhabitant, which is the inside. Can we go back one? The inside, that's it. All those social priorities of humanity. I study economics here. What people need to lead a life of dignity, participation, and opportunity. What the planet needs to be a thriving, healthy planet. Now let's invite markets and the state and the commons and the household as organizing frames into the room and ask ourselves, how do we best design economies that actually enable us to do this? And there are far, far too few economics courses in the world that are even beginning here. Some of them are, but the 20th century led us to believe that growth will clean up after itself. And it doesn't. It may help clean local air and water pollution, but on the global scale of carbon emissions, material footprint, growing economies tend to have a rising footprint unless the state or cities strongly intervene to cut it. 20th century economics told us that growth will even things up again. That we may go through a period of austerity and inequality, but stick with it. Don't try to redistribute because you see growth will even up. No, it won't. We need systems that intervene to make economies more equitable. So we need a state and we need cities that step in and shape our economies to make them work for everybody.
Brilliant, thank you. So that sounds like a very profound and fundamental change that we need. And given the time limit we're on, how are we going to change these systems in time?
So first of all, you stop teaching supply and demand. It's October now, right? So students have just joined university. Many of them study economics because they want to be part of this, and they're being taught the old theories. It's outrageous. So we should start with the world in which we live. Some people still need to talk the language of power to power. So I've been discussing at this summit with people who say, well, I need to tell the Treasury the value of ecosystem services, the value of natural capital, and I need to put it in a financial number. And I understand that because you need to talk power to today's power, and that language is monetary. But let's simultaneously reframe the future. I sincerely believe that 21st century economics is going to be practiced first and theorized properly later. The economics departments will catch up with us. And where will they go to find out 21st century economics? I say this not with any flattery. They will go to cities, because cities are 21st century economies. It's where you have, as Mayor Akisoya of Freetown, Sierra Leone was saying just the other day, it's where you have the waste and the transport and the local environment where the water washes down if you've cut down your trees. It's where you have unemployment and inequality and jobs. The city is all of this. So this is where 21st century economics is getting reinvented. And no pressure on you, mayors, but you are the leading 21st century economists in the policies that you derive to bring us into this space. Economics departments will come running after you. Within a decade, they will be telling the stories that you're already practicing now.
Brilliant. So create the practice first and worry about the theory later. That's a great moment to bring in Alison Tickell, the founder of Julie's Bicycle, promoting the role of arts, heritage, and culture in sustainability. So we hear an awful lot about technology. Let's bring you in to talk about what's the role of arts and culture in bringing about the changes that Kate's been talking about.
Thank you, and thank you, Kate. She's framed beautifully what we are trying to do across the arts and culture. And very often they're minimised. If you think about the creative community, it designs our lives around us. It's the clothes we choose to wear. We hear the messages through broadcasting, through film, through media. It's our heritage, it's our belief systems, our myths, the cultures around which we shape our lives, and it is also the arts. And I'm here to tell you that all the technocrats, all the politicians, all the engineers have not solved this problem, partly because we have not brought in the thing that makes us really thrive, which is arts and culture. And that's why it's such a critical part of the thriving cities. It's absolutely baffling to me, we've been doing this for about 15 years, that the arts and culture and creative community have not been at the heart of these conversations. Culture reflects who we are. I think we can all feel that in relation to one another and in relation to the world around us. But it does much more. It also defines it. It is a very strong determinant of our identities. It speaks to our deepest selves, and it also brings us all together in a sense of shared belonging. Our artists speak to us in languages, the language of music, of movement, of dance, of image and metaphor that are so much more meaningful than the babble of what we hear every day. And also I wanted to point out that art is deeply interconnected to nature. We heard that today with Vandana. It always has been, and often the distinction between art and nature is almost imperceptible. Culture, the generous definition of culture is it's our language, it's the food we eat, it's our customs. And so much of cultural heritage is being lost to the climate crisis, and that's as relevant to our cities as it is to our countryside. Cities are the crucibles of the arts, of the creative industries, and culture. And there is an explosion in response to the climate crisis. It's furious, it's grieving, and it's a loving message to us all about loss, toxic consumerism, the poisoning of our planet, the madness of our current economic modelling, and the exposure of systemic injustice to people and other beings with whom we share this planet. And by the way, the arts and culture are an economic sector just like anything else. My company, Julie's Bicycle, has spent the last year collecting environmental, creative and behavioural data across 5,000 different organisations and individuals in the arts across 50 countries, and art does have a carbon footprint. Data does matter, but only when you suffuse that data with meaning, so that it actually means something to the people who are trying to interpret it. To be effective, I would say, to be effective with this challenge, both in the short term, urgent action, and in the long term, so that transformation can endure, creative community needs to be embedded deeply within your thinking. Otherwise, it won't work, and I think that is true. Politics is quite ephemeral, it's fragile. And many cities are reading this, are recognising this. Maimouna Mod Sharif yesterday talked about how she's engaging young people and the arts and culture in climate action in Penang Island. Manchester have put this at the heart of their climate change strategy. New York, Taipei, Cape Town, Amsterdam, Barcelona, we are seeing this now at the city level. So, to cities, seek it out. Bear witness to this irrepressible force. Enable your artists to tell your story along with theirs. Put your creative designers to good, purposeful, intentional use. Put your poets into your policy making and your cultural placemakers to embody a transformational change, the change we need to see. Show how a thriving city needs to look. Think of your creative community as your creative ecology. We talk about regenerative practice. This is where we can locate regenerative practice. And just to reiterate again, the cultural sector is an economic sector just like anything else. What do you in your cities need to see in terms of a cultural ecology that puts our planet right at the forefront of it? Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. So some practical advice there for mayors, but also some inspiration about how the arts and culture can help us to rise above the babble of everyday life and also be a powerful force to bring people together. So I'm pleased to introduce Jaime Margolin, who's also bringing people together as the founder and co-executive director of the Youth Climate Justice Movement 0 Hour, and the author of the forthcoming book, Youth to Power, Your Voice and How to Use It. So look out for that coming in 2020. So as the founder and ED of a youth climate advocacy organization, does this resonate for you and your members? If you can generalize, are young people worried about economic issues and the economy within their cities?
Yeah, so I feel like right now the Doughnut model really resonates with young people because we have realized that the current economic system does not work, that eternal growth, this idea of eternal economic growth with just a linear model, if you want to, you brought the props to show what a linear model looks like, where it's just, you just consume and consume and consume and just exponentially, and you take and take and take, and that just keeps going up and up and up. Our Earth can't sustain that. Our Earth cannot physically sustain that, but that, where I come from in the United States, eternal economic growth is less of a fairy tale and more of like a fanatic religion. Everyone is so obsessed with the American dream, this idea that success in life and happiness means so much money you don't know what to do with it, beating out your competitors and just accumulating and accumulating. And the minute someone starts to slightly critique that, then you're a communist and you're going against the American ideals. How dare you attack the American dream? And that's really what we're up against, because the way I think about it, living in the United States, our very foundation is exactly how the climate crisis was caused. And so solving the climate crisis is the most un-American thing ever, and that's what we're going to have to do. And so we're going to have to think how we even identify as Americans, because if you think about this, and I'll get to how it relates to the economic stuff in the first place, we were founded, for those of you outside of the country who don't take, who haven't learned that much about American history or whatever, we were founded on a genocide of roughly 90 million indigenous folks, and then built by slaves who were forced to imported from Africa. And so that's our history. So we're a colonial settler state built off of extraction, built off of capitalism on steroids, and but we have these foundational documents that say everything that we're not, that it's equal, that it's opportunity, that we're the land of the free. So it's like this great American hypocrisy. And now when we're faced with this climate crisis, a lot of American kids growing up, like, we're kind of seeing how what we're fed in school, the propaganda that we're fed in school, I say propaganda because it is this idea that it's just all about growth and consuming, and you're studying to just be at the top, and it's all about, maybe I can be one of the top 1%. Maybe that's, and that's like the dream. The climate crisis is making us realize that we have to revisit our entire identity as Americans, and we have to have reparations, like apologize and overhaul everything that we've done in the past, and that includes like justice for indigenous folks and everything like that. And we have to, the only way that we're going to solve the climate crisis, especially as like one of the world's biggest major polluters, is to have we're having an identity crisis. And my generation, Generation Z, or as I call us, Generation GND, Generation Green New Deal, in the US, kind of sees that this isn't working, and for the first time, I'll be taking notes like in school, and like, even our teachers, she'll be going through our history books, and she'll be like, okay, it says that, but actually, and so there's kind of a shift. She's just like, okay, yeah, so these founding fathers, yeah, slave owner, like that's we're starting to, at least in my school where I live in Seattle, which is like super progressive. If you go down in the other parts of the country, they call, I don't even want to get into it, but we're starting to understand that, and we're starting to push for that shift. And so my organization, 0 Hour, what we focus on is addressing the root systems of oppression that caused the climate crisis in the first place, which we have identified, not alone, but also working with the kids at Standing Rock, who it's, for those of you outside of the country who don't know what Standing Rock is, it was a major show of indigenous resistance, stopping a pipeline temporarily until Trump got elected and said, I'm going to build it anyway, so that's fun. But pretty much what we identified as the current economic system of exponential growth capitalism, which is what you laid out. That's the main root of the climate crisis. Colonialism, and this idea of extraction, that people and the earth are yours for the taking, that you can just take and take and take and consume, and that's okay. So colonialism. Patriarchy, which is, a lot of people don't think of sexism intertwined with the climate crisis, but I really recommend everyone reading this book called The Chalice and the Blade, which actually shows how like patriarchy is a lot of the root of how we even got to colonialism, and it's like the root of a lot, the oppression of women is very much intertwined with the oppression of the earth. And like, if you think about it, how we treat women is how we treat the earth right now in a lot of the world. So you can really measure our global community's way of treating our Mother Earth with how we treat women. And then racism. The climate crisis is inherently racist, and carbon in the air is not racist. The molecules don't really care. But people are. And the climate crisis is caused by people, and the colonizing countries, the way, at least with the Americas, the way it played out was it was inherently racist. And so if you think about it, in the United States, it's around 70% of coal plants are built in low-income communities and communities of color. And this is not an accident. This is because you're not going to see a coal plant in like Beverly Hills, California, with like the movie stars. You're going to see it in a community that maybe is a lot more oppressed. And so anyone who is a victim of these four systems of oppression, people who are not benefiting from capitalism, people who are not benefiting from racism, people who are not benefiting from sexism, and people who are not benefiting from racism feel the worst effects of this crisis. This is not just seen in the United States, this is seen globally, with the global South in getting the worst effects, especially Latin America and other places around the world. And so when I saw your, I was learning about donut economics. I heard a little about it before, but when I saw your plenary, that really resonates with kids like me, because we're ready for something new, and we're ready to build something new because we see this. I feel like there's a really powerful opportunity for collaboration here, because 0 Hour, we have a campaign called Getting to the Roots of the Climate Crisis, where we go around, we have like 700 climate justice ambassadors right now. We train them on like a big PowerPoint of how all these systems of oppression, how we got to the climate crisis, the root reason of why we're in this, and then we talk to them about solutions. And even though we don't call it the donut model, but you kind of communicated what we wanted in from an economics perspective, because most of us haven't even graduated high school yet, so I don't have that level of economic sophistication, but I get it. And so what we want is this is a performance. What we want is this. We want that circular economic donut system. We want something new, and we're ready for something new. And so when you see young people striking in the streets, when you see us protesting, when you see us doing all of this, it's not like we're all like directly protesting for the donut. That's something that most of us don't know. But we're protesting for something new, and whether you call it the donut model or really whether you call it an end to extractive colonial capitalism as we know it, we're ready for something new, and it's not just about being ready. Our lives depend on something new because we physically cannot solve this climate crisis within the same colonial extractive system that caused it. I realize I've gone on here, but I just want to end with one thing. Albert Einstein defined insanity as trying to solve an issue with the same thinking that caused it. And so right now, what is insanity is trying to solve an issue within the same linear exponential I'm not going to make you hold it up again, but with the same linear exponential growth economy that caused it. So that would be insanity. Thank you.
Brilliant. Great. Have we got time now for a question from the audience? I don't know if there's any available on the live stream as well. Okay, here's a question up here. Yeah, is there a microphone for this? So for the benefit of those who couldn't hear, maybe on the live stream as well, so we're talking about the mindset shift needed to open up the financing needed to create this shift, and how everybody can get involved in making that a reality. So who would like to speak to this?
I'll jump in and say, so in terms of finding alternative financing, so let's shut down the tax havens that so many countries use as a competitive advantage, because they're not serving anybody, actually. My country, the UK, too complicit in allowing tax havens, but many high-income countries, which may be present in the room, I know we're talking cities here, but too often allowing large, major corporations that are capturing, where's my lovely, right? Capturing the values in the hands of a 1% in some very large companies, and then taking it off to an island destination. I can put it here in the tropical island here, right? Taking that value away to the tropical island. This is not serving us. And cities, I know some cities give major discounts to large corporations to settle there, and then you don't have to pay any local tax. What are we doing to ourselves? This is one of the major sources of income for humanity to reinvest in a system that works for us all. So for me, this is one of the places, because so often people say we can't get away from endless growth because governments need money to fund our healthcare system, to fund our pensions. And yet we're giving away cash all the time to corporations who are getting off scot-free without paying any contribution to the society on which they're making all their money. So for me, that's the first move. Can I just come back to this point about growth, because it's very, very important, and Jamie's going to help me here. So you know, we might have to do this together. Yeah, exponential growth curve. Okay, hang on. So this is the exponential growth curve, and this is the idea at the heart of economics. But if we look at nature's growth curve, keep holding it, keep holding it. Nature does this. Hold it there. There we are. Thank you. Okay, this is nature's growth curve. Growth is a wonderful, healthy phase of life. No wonder we love it. We love to see plants grow. We love to see our children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews grow. So growth is a wonderful, healthy phase of life, but then things grow up, and that's how they mature, and that is how they thrive. I want to make this point really clear, because, keep holding it up, because there are many countries, mayors and city officials from many, many different countries in the world. Now, some countries are low-income countries. Some cities cannot meet their citizens' most basic needs, and I would say maybe they're here, and they need economic growth. That is invested in transport and healthcare and education and housing and food for all. And some cities in this room may say, we're actually on this part of the growth curve, and we need to grow in a way that's never been done before. But there are also cities from high-income countries like this one, like my own, like Australia, America, Japan, Canada, all the high-income countries, We're somewhere more over here. So this growth challenge is a challenge to the high-income countries among us. Let's just be very clear that lower-income societies where people do not meet their basic needs, they need economic growth. That is channeled into meeting those needs within the means of the planet. I just wanted to say that because it's not about being against growth. It's about realizing that growth is a part of a phase of life, and then we grow up. And then coming back to the finances, how on earth do we move in high-income countries? How do we move our financing from assuming that the economy will always get bigger? No matter how big we already are, we want to get bigger. There's something insane in that. How do we start shifting the way we finance the future, the way we finance the city, the way we finance pensions? How do we start shifting that in recognition that our economy must at some point grow up and mature and no longer get bigger at 3, 5, 10% a year? To me, that is actually the existential economic question of the 21st century. And I don't claim to have the answers. I really want to see more financial experts in the room ready to talk about this new reality.
I'd also add that the American government funnels so much money into our military. Like, our military has a bigger, I don't have the exact statistic, but the American military industrial complexes, like the amount of money put in is like more than the GDP of like most countries combined. So even just that in terms of like how we pay for it, how we do that, like just taking the military industrial complex and holding that accountable is really huge.
Thank you. But the question also focused on not just the analysis, but how can ordinary people get involved in changing the mindset? So in the next panel, we're going to hear about mayors and what they can do, but what can young people, what can people do in terms of arts and culture in order to help make this mindset shift and make these things possible? Alison, have you got something to say?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's a really critical part of your toolbox. Last Friday, so one of the other issues about money is so much is sunk now into supporting fossil fuels, and the fossil fuel industry does an awful lot to promote themselves, particularly associating themselves with high-profile, kind of glamorous, glitzy bits of your cities. Last week, we had 2 big events in London, which is one of my cities. First of all, the BP sponsorship was taken away from 2 major iconic organisations. One was our National Theatre, and the other was the Royal Shakespeare Company. This has been a long-term, high-profile campaign by some really powerful but very under-supported activists. And there's been a huge anxiety right across our cultural sector. It happened, and it was highly supported. Everybody was really thrilled to see this differentiation between what it is that arts and culture are supposed to be doing, which is very often speaking to our deepest values, and yet saying that they can't quite extract themselves from these fossil fuel companies. These are now becoming reputational risks. But there's also the other side of it, and I spoke a bit about this before. Your creative community are your best advocates. They're so often young people. They're so often the people who are experiencing the worst injustices. They speak to truth in a way that young people do, but they speak to truth really ubiquitously, and you're not using them. And they are so critical to use all of that opportunity to actually speak around these issues in different ways to many communities who are not in this room and really would not understand what we're talking about. So we have to look at different ways of
I'm really sorry, we're going to have to move on to our next panel now, but thank you so much. Let's say thank you to Kate, Alison and Jaime. And we're going to hear a bit more from Jaime later on, but now we're going to welcome up onto the panel representing Portland, Oregon is Mayor Ted Wheeler, the Governor of Abidjan, Robert Mambe, and from Amsterdam, Eveline Jonkhoff, who's the Program Manager for Circular Economy. Yeah, thank you. Oh, okay. Thank you. Wonderful. So we're going to start with Mayor Ted Wheeler. So you're the mayor of Portland, Oregon. You've also spent more than a decade creating a more inclusive economy for citizens of Oregon. And Portland is seen as has this reputation as a very experimental city. You can try new things there. Do you think Portland is ready to make changes and move the structure of the economy to one that's more sustainable?
So the answer to the question is yes, and we're already working to do that. But I want to give a little context here first. What does it mean to be the mayor of an American city, particularly on the West Coast right now? My job is crisis management. I have an economic crisis, an income distribution crisis, a global climate crisis, an addiction crisis, a mental health crisis, a housing crisis, a homeless crisis, an infrastructure crisis, and a crisis in government. That's the day when I finish my cup of coffee. But what ties all of these things together? It's the work that we're doing here around climate justice and a just transition towards achieving our climate goals while building the communities. And Kate, I want to give you credit for your model, because a lot of our thinking in the city of Portland is based on the thinking that you've done around the Doughnut theory, which, by the way, is the best name ever for an economics model. Portland has led for many years. We were the first city in the United States to have a climate action plan with carbon reduction goals back in 1993. We are now on our 5th iteration of that plan, and we've always had a long-term view. But we also like to be on the innovation curve when it comes to figuring out how do we achieve our climate action goals more quickly. And when I talk to young people like Jaime, who just did a fabulous job on this panel, and other youth, they're saying, look, you're doing the right things, but you're doing it too slowly. You're not scaling it large enough, and you're not moving quickly enough. So the kinds of things we're talking about in this workshop are the kinds of leveraging things that we can do to actually make a sizable difference in our climate action goals. One of the things we did, this is a little geeky, but it is a consumption-based emissions inventory. This was part of our 2015 climate action plan. And what we did basically, I didn't bring a donut or anything, and I probably should have, but we basically took all of the goods, all of the services, all of the food that is consumed in our local economy, regardless of where it was produced, and we looked at the life cycle contribution to carbon emissions of those goods and services. And in a nutshell, what we found is goods and services that were produced elsewhere rather than in our own local economy contributed about twice as much to carbon emissions. So if we're serious about the health of our community, the livability of our community, the well-being of the residents in our community, we have to start talking about how we reduce the life cycle cost of carbon emissions for consumption. And Kate's model, of course, is instrumental in this. We know that it's not just about reducing consumption anymore. When we started our climate action planning back in the 90s, it was all about reduce, reuse, recycle. But in Portland, as with many cities on the West Coast, we have a lot of people who frankly need to consume more. We have a lot of people living on our streets. They need more housing, they need more health care, they need more access to job training, they need more education, they need a lot of things just to get to that outer rim, if you will, of the donut that Kate Raworth's model identifies as the sustainable consumption place where you want your sustainable economy to be. At the same time, you want to limit overconsumption. And so we've been talking about strategies on how we can do that. We have actually been working with Kate. She came to Portland last month and had the opportunity to meet with a number of my bureau directors in the city of Portland. And now we're going to do the all-important work of outward-facing community engagement. In other words, how can we work with the community? Because there's already a lot of leadership in our community around this sustainable economy. And just to be very quick about this, we already have libraries. For example, libraries where you can share building supplies or kitchen utensils. I mean, how many blenders do we need, right? How many blenders do you actually need? Not that many. How many gigantic mixing bowls do you need? Not that many. And what happens when you move to a smaller unit or an apartment or something, you don't have room for all that stuff? Does it go to the landfill? No, it can go to a library and it can be reused and other people can use it more effectively. So we're taking the things that we've produced in our economy and more effectively utilizing them and make sure they don't slide off the bottom of the supply curve that Kate has identified right into our landfills. We have repair cafes. That's for everything from clothing to electronics products. Rather than having things just get thrown out when they have a hole in them or something, no, repair them. There's somebody in our economy who could use it, and by using it, maybe they can get from the center of the donut hole into that outside rim. So there's sort of a symbiotic relationship between those who maybe have used a product to the full extent that they want to use the product, but with a repair or refurbishment, somebody else could gain a whole new value, a whole new benefit from the consumption of that refurbished product. And in the process, you create jobs, you expand your economy, and therefore we have this virtuous circle in our circular economy where we are reusing, we are engaging people, we are retooling and retraining them to get them out of the center of the donut hole and actually actively engaged in a prosperous part of our economy. Finally, we have relationships with very important nonprofits. We have, for example, this great organization called Free Geek. Best name ever, especially for somebody like me. Free Geek takes used electronic products, they refurbish them, and then they allow people who are lower income to gain access to those electronic products. So instead of landfilling them, and by the way, those Apple phones and your iPads and your laptops, those are some of the worst things in the world to end up in a landfill. They're highly toxic. And so to be able to go to Free Geek and be able to use those products and have them also do the training to help people to participate in that process is important. And finally, we have something called the Rebuilding Center in Portland that we're all very proud of. We have a deconstruction ordinance in the city of Portland. So the old days of just demolishing stuff and sending it to the landfill, and by the way, a lot of old buildings contain a lot of really toxic materials, think asbestos and lead paint and things like that. Now they are deconstructed. That's our goal, is to get to full deconstruction, and then they go to nonprofits like the Rebuilding Center, where builders and architects and others can go in and actually reuse those products in brand new buildings. So we're, again, getting back to that circular economy. So those are just some of the things that we're thinking about how we structure, but it's partnership with nonprofits, partnership and engagement with the community, partnerships with businesses so that they can continue to thrive as we become more of a circular economy and we get to that economic and that cultural shift that the prior panel had talked about. We feel like we're already well on that path in Portland. We gotta continue on it, and we know that everybody in this room is committed to that kind of a future.
Thanks so much, Ted. That's some really practical advice about how to start restructuring your economy in a way that's really inclusive and working for all the citizens. So now we're going to come to Robert Mambe, the governor of Abidjan, which is a rising economy. How do citizens feel about changing the economic system in a growing economy? And can you tell us a bit about some of the green neighborhoods that have emerged in your city and how they might have the power to generate a new economic system?
Ladies and gentlemen, I ask your agreement to speak in French because my English is not very quite, but I have a good translator near me. Thank you. Au niveau de la Côte d'Ivoire, la croissance moyenne annuelle est de 8 à 9%.
So in Côte d'Ivoire, average growth in Côte d'Ivoire is around 8 to 9% annually.
Mais il y a une philosophie de base qui soutient l'action dans le domaine urbain.
But there's a basic philosophy that underlies this in urban development.
C'est que l'urbain doit être au service de l'humain.
The cities must be there to serve their people.
C'est pourquoi, dans l'économie que le président de la République met en œuvre, nous privilégions tout ce qui peut contribuer à améliorer les conditions de vie des populations.
Which is why in everything that our president is currently undertaking, everything needs to be geared at improving the livelihoods of our population.
Je vais donner quelques exemples et ensuite parler des quartiers verts.
So I'll give you a few examples of this and then tell you about our green neighborhoods.
Par exemple, la mesure de la qualité de l'air, nous en avons fait une priorité.
Measuring air quality, for instance, has become a key priority.
C'est pourquoi nous avons bitumé toutes les voies qui conduisent dans les villages.
which is why we have tarmacked over all of the access roads into our villages.
Nous avons 150 villages à Abidjan.
There were 150 villages in Abidjan.
Nous avons limité l'âge des véhicules importés parce que chez nous, on importe beaucoup de véhicules d'Occident, hein, les véhicules déjà usagés, les véhicules d'occasion. Nous avons limité l'âge à 5 ans au maximum.
We have also limited the age of the imported vehicles from abroad because, as you know, in Africa, a lot of vehicles are second-hand imported from abroad, and we have now restricted these to vehicles of less than 5 years.
Il y a des brigades de salubrité qui contrôlent la salubrité des quartiers.
We have health brigades that go around and check that we have salubrious neighborhoods.
Et le gouvernement a développé un transport collectif de grande capacité.
And the city has developed large capacity mass transit.
À Abidjan, nous avons une compagnie de transport collectif.
There's we have a public transport company in Abidjan.
Et le ticket de bus est lourdement subventionné.
And the bus ticket is heavily subsidized.
Par exemple, avec 5 euros, l'étudiant peut circuler pendant tout le mois avec son ticket de bus.
A student, for instance, can freely use public transport for €5 a month.
Les fonctionnaires, avec 8 euros, ils peuvent circuler pendant tout le mois.
The subscription for civil servants is €8 a month.
Cela permet d'avoir des échanges avec les quartiers nouveaux qui sont construits.
That creates more communication with new neighborhoods that are being built.
Et qui sont à 10-15 km du centre-ville.
Which are, say, 10 to 15 kilometers from the city
Alors, du point de vue de l'économie verte,
so if we look at the green economy,
Abidjan a un plan de planting d'arbres de près de 82 000 arbres dans toute la ville.
Abidjan has a greening project that includes planting 82,000 trees across the city.
Nous avons un parc, une forêt dense et primaire, une forêt primaire de près de 3500 hectares en plein Abidjan.
We have a rainforest, a primary forest that's almost 3,500 hectares in the heart of the city.
Un jardin botanique de 50 hectares.
A 50-hectare botanical garden.
Une forêt florale de près de 175 hectares.
A 175-hectare floral forest.
Et nous avons transformé l'ancienne décharge, nous allons transformer en jardin public sur 100 hectares.
And the former landfill has been turned into a 600-hectare public park.
Et dans mon programme d'action de 2020, je prévois de créer un parc botanique de près de 50 hectares.
And in my plan for 2020, I intend to create a 50-hectare botanical garden.
Il faut savoir qu'au niveau d'Abidjan, nous sommes très proches de la nature.
In Abidjan, we are very close to the natural world.
Parce que Abidjan est Abidjan est encadré par la mer d'un côté et la lagune de l'autre.
Because Abidjan has on one side the ocean and on the other a laguna.
Donc c'est une ville où il y a beaucoup d'eau.
So it's a city with a lot of water.
Et tout l'aménagement que nous faisons, nous privilégions la présence de l'espace vert.
And of course, everything we do focuses on the presence of green spaces.
La moyenne, c'est de 5% d'espace vert dans un hectare. Il faut qu'il y ait moins 5% d'espace vert.
And we intend to have at least 5% green space for each hectare of the city.
Mais le président a demandé que nous passions à un niveau plus élevé, plus de 5%.
But our president has asked us to go beyond that, higher than 5%.
Et nous avons fait une étude pour restructurer les quartiers, certains quartiers anciens.
And we've also decided to refurbish, restructure certain old neighborhoods.
Des éco-quartiers, ce que nous appelons les éco-quartiers.
By creating what we call eco-neighborhoods.
Nous avons un exemple où les études sont déjà terminées.
One example, research has already been conducted.
Et nous cherchons maintenant des financements pour réaliser et pour donner un modèle de développement des quartiers éco.
And we're now looking for funding, and it can serve as a pilot project, a model for the construction of other eco-neighborhoods.
Pour multiplier ces genres de quartiers.
So that we can multiply them.
Alors, du point de vue modèle économique, il faut travailler pour aider les plus pauvres de la population.
So, and in terms of the economic model, everything we do must help lesser favored populations.
C'est pourquoi nous mettons l'accent sur les jeunes et les femmes.
Which is why we're very much focusing on young people and women.
Par exemple, nous avons au niveau du district d'Abidjan, nous avons créé un centre d'incubation.
We've created an incubator in the Abidjan district.
Chaque année, nous lançons un concours de start-up
Every year we have a competition of startups.
et nous sélectionnons les meilleurs projets et les meilleurs présentateurs de projets.
We select the best project holders,
Nous les mettons dans un centre d'incubation.
place them in the incubator,
Nous les encadrons pendant 1 an.
help them for a year,
Nous finançons les projets.
fund their project,
Et dans la deuxième année, nous les laissons partir.
and in the second year they fly with their own wings.
Je vous remercie.
Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Robert. And it's such an inspiring vision. I think a lot of us will be thinking about how we can have a forest and a floral forest and a botanical garden all right in the center of our city. It's beautiful. Thank you. So now I'm going to move on to Eveline Jonkhoff from the city of Amsterdam, who's an expert in circular economy. Amsterdam's been critiqued for its linear economy, but now has been working for 4 years to turn this around and start to build a circular economy. So, Eveline, can you tell us how you're doing it?
Yes, try to explain, say, the complex and most fundamental challenge we ever faced in history. And starting by saying that it is so confronting to know that we use 3.5 planets to fulfill our daily needs. And in combination with increasing emissions, that really shocked us. So as a city 4 years ago, we take up the responsibility to change that by first mapping our urban metabolism. So what comes in our city by the airport, by the harbor, how is it used in our city, and how it's leaving our city in a form of waste. And of course, it's a huge challenge when you look and say, okay, we want this circular and climate neutral city at the latest at 2050. Where are you going to start? So we use this mapping to focus, to make choices. And I think it's very difficult to make a choice, but we have to. So we say, okay, let's focus on the construction value chain, on food, on consumer goods as very important value chains with a high ecological impact. So this was our starting point, and in the years and in the past years and also in the coming years, we work so closely together with businesses, with citizens, with research institutes, and because there are so many questions that we find the answer for and not yet have the answer for, but we started simply by learning by doing, proving in practice what works and what doesn't work, and also learn from all your failures. And that means that we realized over 100 different projects already in the field of circular economy, challenging the private sector to come up with circular buildings using renewed materials, secondary materials, but also making our buildings future-proof, make them more flexible and more adaptable to future needs. But also we can use our procurement power. We can challenge the market by saying, okay, we want a different design and a different use of our public space, because we as a city, we own our public space. So we are responsible for the design and the use and the maintenance of this public space. So that's our purchasing power. But also when you look at city districts, you mentioned already repair cafes. It's an excellent way underground to showcase that you can repair your things and reuse them in a better way. And we also installed, say, so-called recycling hubs where people can bring their goods and see that they are repaired and reused again. And it also showcases, I think, the innovative and creative power, and we have to unleash that power within our cities. Because this transition can bring us so many benefits in terms of new jobs. new added value, not only financial value, but societal value as well. And thereby at the same time decreasing our CO2 emissions, decreasing the amount of material resources we use today. And that's also the reason that we partner with Portland and Philadelphia, C40 Gateways and Circular Economy within this Thriving Cities program, to learn what it means if you make an integrated donut or portrait of your city, not only taking responsibility for the local aspects of our city, but also the global impact we have. So we take the world into account and take up also that responsibility. So being very honest about what we cause on the local level and on the global level, both from an ecological perspective as well as from a societal perspective. Can we really contribute to live within our planetary boundaries and at the same time strengthen our social foundation? And I do believe that that is key. It is key to realize a truly thriving city, a regenerative and inclusive city for everyone within the planetary boundaries.
Great, thank you so much. Very inspiring and similar to what we heard earlier. We don't know everything, but we just start and learn as we go along through collaboration with other cities and with our local businesses. We're running short of time. We're going to hear again from Jaime, I think, in a minute. Have we got time for one question? No, we're sorry, we've run out of questions, but you can come up and talk to the panelists at the end. So thank you so much to our panelists. We're going to hear one more time from Jaime. Sorry, I think she's going to come here.
Hola a todos, ¿cómo están? Bien, the word is bien. That means good in Spanish. So for those of you who weren't here before for the first part of the panel, my name is Jaime Margolin. I'm a 17-year-old climate justice activist from Seattle, Washington, and I'm a founder of the youth climate action organization called 0 Hour. I got started doing climate action when I was 14 years old, back in 2016 after the 2016 election, but the reality is that the climate crisis has been something that has always been looming over my life and my future. There was never a time in my life where I didn't hear about the climate crisis. To put it in perspective for you, I was born after 9/11, so not only has constant airport security always been a reality for me, but so has the fact that life as we know it on this planet is coming to an end. I cannot pinpoint the exact moment that I first heard about the climate crisis. I was a toddler when An Inconvenient Truth came out, so by Al Gore, and so it wasn't like I have anything to pinpoint. It's just been something where, I mean, right now I'm going through college application hell. The college application system in the United States is quite a ride. It's horrible and it's so much work. So right now I'm in the middle of that process, and I'm constantly asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? What are your plans? What do you want to do? And it's very hard to plan for your future and plan for something that does not exist. I am planning and working for a future that my leaders are actively making sure that I don't have. And so that's something that I've known ever since I can remember. And so imagine what that does to a kid and does to an entire generation when we are in a phase in our lives where all that we do is for our future, but that future is not there. For a while, I just held on to this anxiety. I didn't know what to do about it. I just held on to it, and maybe I would write a school report about the climate crisis. Maybe I would, talk to friends about it, try to raise awareness, watch some documentaries, but it wouldn't go farther than that because I didn't know how. So it wasn't until the 2016 election in the United States that went very interestingly that I snapped out of my fear. For a while, the way I dealt with climate anxiety, which is actually now something that psychologists are identifying as like an actual condition where you have like physical, like chronic anxiety due to the climate crisis. It's very common in kids my age. the way I dealt with it was avoiding thinking about climate change at all. Anytime that there would be a climate crisis story on the news, my mom would be like, oh, hey, like there's something about climate change. I would not want to hear it. I would plug my ears and be like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to. I was a rhythmic gymnast at the time. I was an athlete, and I would just be doing everything. I would just be focusing on school, trying to get good grades, focusing on my gymnastics, getting upset over losing competitions, and that distracted me. And so I would just avoid thinking about it at all costs. That was how I coped. And so it wasn't until the election when I realized that that was a privilege that I had, that I could just avoid and not think about it, but I couldn't do that to myself anymore, and I couldn't do that to my earth anymore, because I knew, as someone coming from a place, I live in Seattle, Washington, with a very supportive family and a very stable situation. I was very privileged, and more privileged than most of the world, and I was sitting on that, just plugging my ears and closing my eyes and trying to just make the climate crisis go away, just by escaping it. And I realized that that wasn't going to cut it anymore. And so I joined a local environmental organization called Plant for the Planet. It was in December of 2016, and I just walked into a meeting. I had never been to any meeting like that before, and I just sat in. I just sat there in the meeting, and then a week later, I found myself, I was just rushed into a lobbying expedition, talking to my politicians at the state capitol of Olympia in Washington State, and I was running around with the organization, getting bill signatures, trying to pass a local initiative in Washington State. Spoiler alert, it did not pass, but I learned that, I learned so much from that experience, and so then from then on, it just snowballed. It was my freshman year of high school, my first year of high school, and I was just working and organizing and working. And suddenly, I quit gymnastics. I just focused full-time into being a climate justice activist outside of school. My grades dropped. I'm not failing school. Like, I'm doing fine. But I'm not like a stellar student anymore. And it's honestly not a priority for me to be top of my class anymore. It's not. I pass my classes and I do the best I can. But I feel like math homework or saving the world, it's kind of not, I don't know. I choose saving the world, so I was doing that work, and this was before Greta Thunberg started her strike. This was before there was a massive appreciation for youth climate activism. So there was no press. There was no actual, if you look at the news, there was no actual records of any of this work that I did for over a year. There was no record of any of the work that any of the young people that I work with did. And this is not a matter of wanting press or wanting credit. It's just a matter of, if you look this up, you won't find anything, because no one cared. We were talking to our politicians, and they were Democrats in the very liberal state of Washington, and they were like, yeah, okay. There's nothing I can do. Blame it on the Republican-controlled Senate or whatever. They were just always finding someone to blame. And I didn't know what to do or how to make the world understand. And so for a while, I just kind of kept my head down and did my work, but no one was listening. The press wasn't listening. The government wasn't listening, nationally or locally, and I just felt like I was working myself and losing out on childhood experiences for nothing. And then Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, and Hurricane Harvey hit Texas. These are all like huge climate disasters, hurricanes worsened by the climate crisis. And then on top of that, there was massive wildfires in southern Canada that blew over the city of Seattle, covering our city in a thick layer of smog. This was the first time I'd ever experienced something like that. And suddenly, for the first time, I experienced horrible air quality. I experienced being sick from the air that I was breathing. And that was something so scary. I'd never experienced that before. And I don't have asthma or respiratory illnesses. I'm lucky to be an able-bodied person, but I still got sick. So imagine how my friends with asthma were. They were in the ER, and my friends with chronic diseases like Lyme disease, they were like literally driving down to Oregon trying to find clean air, but they couldn't find any. And that was a wake-up call for me. And I said, you know what? The time is now to act. And so I posted on my Instagram. I had 20 followers back then. I posted on my Instagram, I'm going to start a youth climate march. Who's with me? We're going to have a national youth climate march on Washington, D.C., and in many cities around the world, as many as we can. We're going to take action and demand, and we're going to have mass mobilizations. And 2 young people responded to my via direct message on Instagram. There were people from other parts of the country, Nadia Nazar from Baltimore, and Madeline too from New Jersey. And over the course of 1 year, we had no clue what we're doing, no idea how to organize this massive march, but we worked together and we built a team. And over the course of an entire year, we organized this entire organization that we called 0 Hour, because this is 0 hour to act on climate change. There's no more time. We came up with a logo. It looks like this. It's Earth with its time ticking. We organized everything. We built our own organization. We got a fiscal sponsor who was a 501c3. All of this hours, 5 hours a day, daily, on top of being a high school student full-time in the United States, where high school is very rigorous, and my school is especially rigorous. And we were scared that none of this work would pay off. But on July 21st of 2018, and in 25 cities around the world, we held the youth climate marches. In Washington, D.C., it was pouring rain. And I'm not talking about it was raining little. I'm talking about torrential downpour, massive, the rain hurt when it hit you because it was just violent rain. Still, about 1,000 kids showed up, and we marched on Washington. And the day before that, we had a big lobby day where we talked to our senators, including Senator Bernie Sanders. And when we got back inside, and there were 25 marches around the world. This was about, we got back into the house that we were all staying at. We were all staying in one house, a bunch of teenagers. And we were all wet and dripping, we looked like wet rats, and we were just kind of there. And we were like, did that do anything? And then we didn't know if we had inspired anyone. We didn't know if we had done anything. We didn't know if we had impacted any other young people to act. And we thought, well, did this even change anything? Was all that hard work for nothing? About 3 weeks later, I get a message from a girl from Sweden named Greta Thunberg. She says, I love the work that you're doing. I'm starting this school strike. I hope you'll support me. That's not verbatim. I forget what the exact message says, but I saw that this girl was following me on Instagram, and so I followed her back. And then I saw she started school striking, and I'm not claiming that our marches directly impacted or directly inspired her, because Greta had many, many different reasons for why she was striking. But from what I learned and from my conversations, our marches were laid the groundwork and made the political situation possible for the current school strike movement to happen. And so I'm telling you this story, and my time is up right now, but I'm telling you this story of how I got started and how one movement inspired another and knocked down a domino for a movement that has now mobilized millions, to say that even when you think, and this is for the young people in the room, this is also for the mayors and whoever else is in the room, whoever doubts your own ability or the ability of those around you, that even when you think that you didn't organize something incredible, even when for the organizers in the room, you only got 100 people in the street and you feel like you were a failure, you don't know how many people you inspired. You don't know if you just laid the groundwork for an international movement that would change everything. And that's just what I want to leave you guys with, is that I do not come from a rich family. I don't come from a famous family. I don't come from a political family. I come from just your average Joe family, daughter of a Colombian immigrant, sitting right here in the audience with me. And we were able to build this and lay the groundwork for the most massive youth climate movement that the world has ever seen. So never underestimate yourself, and never underestimate the power of youth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jaime, and thank you very much to all our panelists. As Jaime said, the time for action is now. I hope that these words from our panelists have given you some ideas about what kind of action you can take. And as Jaime said, you never know when you're going to make a difference. So I hope that gives you some inspiration to take out into the rest of the conference. Thanks very much for coming today. Thanks for coming.